Hello to the next part of chapter 54 of Moby Dick by Herman Melville. This chapter is titled The Town Ho's Story, in which Ishmael tells the story of the town ho, and in this part of the chapter particularly of the mutiny that was going on, and I'll continue from where I stopped the last time. All night a wide-awake watch was kept by all the officers, forward and aft, especially about the forecastle scuttle and fore hatchway, at which last place it was feared the insurgents might emerge, after breaking through the bulkhead below. But the hours of darkness passed in peace. The men who still remained at their duty, toiling hard at the pumps, whose clinking and clanking at intervals through the dreary night dismally resounded through the ship. At sunrise the captain went forward and, knocking on the deck, summoned the prisoners to work. But with a yell they refused. Water was then lowered down to them, and a couple of handfuls of biscuits were tossed after it. When again turning the key upon them and pocketing it, the captain returned to the quarter-deck. Twice every day for 3 days this was repeated, but on the fourth morning a confused wrangling and then a scuffling was heard as the customary summons was delivered, and suddenly 4 men burst up from the forecastle, saying they were ready to turn to. The fetid closeness of the air and a famishing diet, united perhaps to some fears of ultimate retribution, had constrained them to surrender at discretion. Emboldened by this, the captain reiterated his demand to the rest, but Steelkilt shouted up to him a terrific hint to stop his babbling and betake himself where he belonged. On the 5th morning 3 others of the mutineers bolted up into the air from the desperate arms below that sought to restrain them. Only 3 were left. "Better turn to now," said the captain with a heartless jeer. "Shut us up again, will ye?" cried Steelkilt. "Oh, certainly," said the captain, and the key clicked. It was at this point, gentlemen, that, enraged by the defection of 7 of his former associates, and stung by the mocking voice that had last hailed him, and maddened by his long entombment in a place as black as the bowels of despair, it was then that Steelkilt proposed to the 2 canallers, thus far apparently of one mind with him, to burst out of their hole at the next summoning of the garrison, and, armed with their keen mincing knives, long, crescentic, heavy implements with a handle at each end, run amuck from the bowsprit to the taffrail, and, if by any devilishness of desperation possible, seize the ship. For himself he would do this, he said, whether they joined him or not. That was the last night he should spend in that den. But the scheme met with no opposition on the part of the other 2. They swore they were ready for that or for any other mad thing, for anything, in short, but a surrender. And what was more, they each insisted upon being the first men on deck when the time to make the rush should come. But to this their leader as fiercely objected, reserving that priority for himself, particularly as his 2 comrades would not yield, the one to the other, in the matter, and both of them could not be first, for the latter would but admit 1 man at a time. And here, gentlemen, the foul play of these miscreants must come out. Upon hearing the frantic projection of their leader, each in his own separate soul had suddenly lighted, it would seem, upon the same piece of treachery, namely, to be the foremost in breaking out, in order to be the first of the 3 though the last of the 10 to surrender, and thereby secure whatever small chance of pardon such conduct might merit. But when Steelkilt made known his determination still to lead them to the last, they in some way, by some subtle chemistry of villainy, mixed their before secret treacheries together, and when their leader fell into a doze, verbally opened their soul to each other in 3 sentences, and bound the sleeper with cords, and gagged him with cords, and shrieked out for the captain at midnight. Thinking murder at hand, and smelling in the dark for the blood, he and his armed mates and harpooneers rushed for the forecastle. In a few minutes the scuttle was opened, and, bound hand and foot, the still struggling ringleader was shoved up into the air by his perfidious allies, who at once claimed the honor of securing a man who had been fully ripe for murder. But all these were collared and dragged along the deck like dead cattle, and, side by side, were seized up into the mizzen rigging, like 3/4 of meat, and there they hung till morning. "Damn ye!" cried the captain, pacing to and fro before them. "The vultures would not touch ye, ye villains!" At sunrise he summoned all hands, and separating those who had rebelled from those who had taken no part in the mutiny, he told the former that he had a good mind to flog them all round, thought upon the while he would do so. He ought to, justice demanded it. But for the present, considering their timely surrender, he would let them go with a reprimand, which he accordingly administered in the vernacular. "But as for you, ye carrion rogues," turning to the 3 men in the rigging, "for you I mean to mince ye up for the tripods." And, seizing a rope, he applied it with all his might to the backs of the 2 traitors till they yelled no more, but lifelessly hung their heads sideways as the 2 crucified thieves are drawn. "My wrist is sprained with ye," he cried at last, "but there is still hope enough left for you, my fine bantam, that would give up. Take that gag from his mouth, and let us hear what he can say for himself." For a moment the exhausted mutineer made a tremulous motion of his crumpled jaws, and then, painfully twisted round his head, said in a sort of hiss, "What I say is this, and mind it well, if you flog me, I murder you." "Say ye so? Then see how you fighten me." And the captain drew off with the rope to strike. "Best not," hissed the lakeman. "But I must," and the rope was once more drawn back for the stroke. Steelkilt here hissed out something inaudible to all but the captain, who, to the amazement of all hands, started back, paced the deck rapidly 2 or 3 times, and then, suddenly throwing down his rope, said, "I won't do it. Let him go. Cut him down. Do you hear?" But as the junior mates were hurrying to execute the order, a pale man with a bandaged head arrested them, Radney, the chief mate. Ever since the blow he had lain in his berth, but that morning, hearing the tumult on the deck, he had crept out, and thus far had watched the whole scene. Such was the state of his mouth that he could hardly speak, but mumbling something about his being willing and able to do what the captain dared not attempt, he snatched the rope and advanced to his pinioned foe. "You are a coward," hissed the lakeman. "So I am, but take that." The mate was in the very act of striking when another hiss stayed his uplifted arm. He paused, and then pausing no more, made good his word, spite of Steelkilt's threat, whatever that might have been. The 3 men were then cut down, all hands were turned to and sullenly worked by the moody seamen. The iron pumps clanged as before. Just after dark that day, when one watch had retired below, the clamour was heard in the forecastle, and the two trembling traitors running up besieged the cabin door, saying they durst not consort with the crew. Entreaties, cuffs, and kicks could not drive them back, so at their own instance they were put down and the ships run for salvation. Still no sign of mutiny reappeared among the rest. On the contrary, it seemed that mainly at Steelkilt's instigation they had resolved to maintain the strictest peacefulness, obey all orders to the last, and, when the ship reached port, desert her in a body. But in order to ensure the speediest end to the voyage, they all agreed to another thing, namely, not to sing out for whales in case any should be discovered. For, spite of her leak, and spite of all her other perils, the Town-Ho still maintained her mastheads, and her captain was just as willing to lower for a fish that moment as to the day his craft first struck the cruising ground, and Radney, the mate, was quite as ready to change his berth for a boat, and with his bandaged mouth seek to gag in death the vital jaw of the whale. So I have to stop now today. Bye-bye till next time with, the rest. Maybe the rest. I don't know how long this chapter still is. Maybe the rest of this chapter.